Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Sunday, everybody. This is a special extra episode for the week. Today's video will be a deep dive into the results of Taiwan's election from yesterday, and their implications for Taipei, Beijing, and the world. We normally take Sundays off. I hope you don't mind doing one more episode this week, and then we'll be back to regular episodes from tomorrow. As usual, the best way to help the channel grow is to like and subscribe. About 45% of regular viewers are not subscribed to the channel, so hitting that like and subscribe button is a massive help. And for those who want to go the extra mile and help keep the channel financially sustainable, I rely primarily on you guys, the subscribers, to keep going. I restrict corporate sponsorship to a few a month to make sure that the majority of the funding comes from regular subscribers. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Now, with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Lai Ching-te, also known as William Lai of the DPP, will succeed his party colleague Tsai Ing-wen to become the next president of Taiwan, an unprecedented democratic milestone as it represents the first time a political party in Taiwan has won a third straight presidential election. Beijing, who had labelled Lai a separatist, will be bitterly disappointed with the result. Indeed, in the run-up to Saturday's vote, Beijing warned Taiwan voters to, quote, make the right choice, end quote, and, quote, recognize the extreme danger of Lai Ching-te's triggering a cross-strait confrontation and conflict, end quote. Susan Shirk, a research professor at the University of California, San Diego, observed, however, quote, the more hard-line, tougher approach hasn't worked, end quote. A voting public that increasingly sees itself as Taiwanese and not Chinese, with a desire to protect its de facto independence and move beyond the mainland's giant shadow, has made up its mind. In saying this, outside of Taiwan, we must remind ourselves that the election was more than just a referendum on China. Cost of living issues, for example, was a dominant part of the campaigning too. Now, Beijing may take some solace in the fact that, in a measure of public frustration at domestic issues like the cost of housing and stagnating wages after 8 years in power, the DPP lost its majority in the legislature, and thus no one party will have enough votes to rule by itself. Taiwan's media reported that the DPP won 51 seats to the KMT's 52, while the TPP got 8. This will mean that Lai will have more difficulties passing legislation. We should also expect Beijing to push a narrative that Taiwan's democratic system is slow and cumbersome due to this minority government state of affairs. We also note that Lai only won 40% of the vote in Taiwan's first-past-the-post system, unlike current Tsai Ing-wen, who was re-elected by a landslide 4 years ago with more than 50% of the vote. Although this landslide victory was in part due to the timing, coming right after the Hong Kong protests and subsequent Beijing crackdown. Still, a win is a win, and Lai, speaking to a jubilant rally of his supporters after his win, expressed, quote, this is a night that belongs to Taiwan. We managed to keep Taiwan on the map of the world. The election has shown the world the commitment of the Taiwanese people to democracy, which I hope China can understand, end quote. Beijing responded soon after, expressing through a spokesperson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, quote, whatever changes take place in Taiwan, the basic fact that there is only one China in the world and Taiwan is part of China will not change, end quote. A spokesperson for Beijing's Taiwan Affairs Office added that the election result, quote, does not represent the mainstream view on the island, end quote, which is quite a statement. In his victory speech, Lai added, quote, we are telling the international community that between democracy and authoritarianism, we still stand on the side of democracy. I will act in accordance with our democratic and free constitutional order in a manner that is balanced and maintains the cross-strait status quo. At the same time, we are also determined to safeguard Taiwan from continuing threats and intimidation from China. In the future, we hope that China will recognize the new situation and understand that only peace benefits both sides of the strait, end quote. Of course, the world knows very well that Beijing, through the words of many actors, including Xi Jinping himself, on multiple occasions, has vowed to incorporate Taiwan into the mainland. through non-peaceful means if necessary. This is part of the party's sacred mission for so-called national rejuvenation. A few weeks ago, General Secretary Xi called this a, quote, historical inevitability, end quote. In his San Francisco meeting last year with President Biden, Xi even said that unification would happen, but that the date of such a move had not yet been fixed. Mainland commentators are already framing the heightened risk of war as being the fault of Lai of the DPP. Quote, Lai Qingde is an impulsive and politically biased figure, so we cannot rule out the possibility that unpredictable and unknown developments may occur during his tenure. I'm afraid it's very dangerous. End quote. Li Zhenguang, also a professor at Beijing Union University's Institute of Taiwan Studies, made similar comments, expressing, quote, clearly this result isn't good news with regard to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The outlook on relations between the mainland and Taiwan is extremely bleak, and confrontation and clashes may become the norm. This trend will cause an extremely negative impact on people-to-people exchanges across the strait. End quote. Thus, with Lai's victory, Taiwan will now become the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoint in the world, and the most difficult strain within the US-China relationship. Evan S. Medeiros, a professor of Asian Studies at Georgetown University, expressed on the election results today, quote, the next 4 years will be anything but stable in US-China and cross-strait relations, end quote. As the New York Times put it today, quote, China and the United States have made Taiwan a test of competing sensitivities and visions. To Beijing, the island is a remnant of its civil war that the United States has no business meddling with. To Washington, it is the first line of defense for global stability, a democracy of 23 million people, and the microprocessor factory for the world. End quote. In Washington, President Joe Biden reiterated the standard U.S. line that, quote, we do not support independence, end quote. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. was committed to maintaining cross-strait peace and stability, adding, quote, and the peaceful resolution of differences free from coercion and pressure, end quote. Mike Johnson, the U.S. Republican House Speaker, congratulated Lai and said he was, quote, happy to see democracy thriving among the Taiwanese people, end quote. The Biden administration will dispatch an unofficial delegation, including former senior officials, to Taipei in the coming days. We covered this earlier in the week. Lai and his VP both have long and close relationships with many current and former U.S. officials, which could mean faster policy cooperation between Taipei and Washington, including more U.S. military advisors on the ground in Taiwan. Individuals who have already been there in some number for some time, and whom Taiwanese officials have half tongue-in-cheekly referred to as English teachers. Quote, Beijing has turned a blind eye, so the question is what size of that presence will cross the Rubicon. Hopefully, each additional step will not be seen as overtly provocative to elicit or justify a massive Chinese reaction. End quote. Tokyo, also a critical informal ally of Taiwan and formal ally of the US, has been watching the election closely. On Saturday, Japan congratulated Taiwan on the election and expressed hopes for peace in the region, with Japan's foreign ministry saying in a statement, quote, Taiwan is an extremely critical partner and an important friend. We expect that the issues surrounding Taiwan will be resolved peacefully through dialogue, thereby contributing to the peace and stability in the region. End quote. Beijing soon after condemned this statement, calling Taiwan an internal affair and demanding that Japan cease from making similar statements in the future. Now, with all this talk about geopolitical implications, we remind ourselves that we are discussing a democratic election, and as such, we should examine what the Taiwanese themselves think before we end today's video. So, we do end today's video by looking at results from a survey from an election study center at National Zhengzhi University, taken from September the 14th through 19th of last year, of 1,211 Taiwanese adults. According to the survey, 33.9% of people agreed that the US was a trustworthy country, while only 9.3% said that China was a trustworthy country. Around 61.2% of respondents rated US democracy as 7 out of 10 or above, in contrast to just 2.8% for China. 55.7% believed that US support for Taiwan's security had increased in recent years, and 82.7% believed that the threat from China had increased in recent years. 65.9% of respondents expressed support for US arms sales to Taiwan. 59.6% of respondents said that visits of high-level US officials to Taiwan increased their belief in the likelihood of US using force to help Taiwan. 78.4% expressed that Taiwan and China do not belong to the same country. In addition, 62.5% considered themselves Taiwanese. Only 2.3% considered themselves just Chinese, and 32.2% said that they were both. 57.9% of respondents believe that the United States will use force to help Taiwan if Beijing tries to unilaterally change the status quo, while 32.8% believe it will not. The majority of people, 91.4%, expressed support for maintaining the current status quo. With all this discussion of the perils of Taiwan's elections, the pressure on Taiwan just to elect its own leaders, I hope that viewers will forgive me for showing my own political bias and making a short personal comment, which is this. I am deeply grateful that I am from a country that enjoys high degrees of freedom and representative democracy, and it is at times like this that I am reminded that we must not take it for granted, lest it be overcome by enemies from without or decay from within. I also express my gratitude for those who came before, whose work and sacrifices allow me to enjoy the country that I do now. I hope that my generation may protect it and indeed add in some modest way to its splendor for future generations too. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful Sunday, have a good weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow.